Hi there and welcome again to Verse Online's Believable RPG series. And we ran a poll earlier this week about what people would most like to see here on the YouTube channel, and the answer was to do a video on believable religions and cults. So it's such a huge, expansive topic that we'll have to look at some kind of basic ideas here, and I'll do some subsequent videos later on. But if we want to make something that's kind of coherent and makes sense and it has that kind of a logic to it, and that's the theme of these videos, that we create things that make sense to the GM, make sense to the players, and therefore add a kind of a robustness to the world, a stability and a believability. Then we have to look at some of the common features that underpin religions. So human beings throughout the history of human civilization have interpreted the world in terms of religion and spirituality and belief using two devices, really: stories and rituals. And if you look at any religion that you care to name, there are obviously more things in religions than that, but these are two common features that basically all religions share. Rituals are things that, practices that human beings do that are imbued with spiritual significance. And stories, obviously the narratives. We've already talked about these in previous videos, which, if you haven't watched them, by the way, check out our video on believable creation myths. Stories are the means by which knowledge is exchanged in a format that human beings readily understand, that have a kind of a beginning, middle and end. Stories, again, about, for example, the creation of the world, or stories that explain what it is the deity has done and why they've done it, and what the deity's intention is. So these two things, if you were constructing a religion, constructing a religious narrative, which may or may not actually be true. It's entirely possible you have a world creation story that is true, the world is created in this particular way, and then plenty of religions existing in your world that believe things that are completely different and arguably not the case. Human beings and non-humans will have perhaps different levels of access to fundamental truths, which are mediated through priests and shamans and spiritual figures. The role of the holy man or woman, the shaman, in tribal cultures, is the link between the mundane world and the divine or the spiritual world. They are the person who can step into the realm of spirit and talk to entities that are kind of metaphysical. They can talk to gods, spirits, ghosts, and return to the mundane world and be able to be a channel between the two, saying, well, I've had a word with God, this is what he wants. And an example of this would be in Native American or Australian Aboriginal culture. The shaman is somebody who is able to see beyond, not just beyond physically over distance, but beyond the kind of the barriers of the physical world. So if you're constructing religion or a cult, one key thing is to examine the role of the spiritual leader, the priest or the witch doctor or the shaman or that sort of figure. If you look at kind of Judeo-Christian religion, you look at the figure of Moses. Moses is chosen by God. He listens to what God has to say. There's a moment where he's he wavers. He doesn't exactly feel he's ready for the task, or up to it, or particularly wants it. And God says, well, you have to do as you're told, really. And he does as a prophet, interprets what God wants and guides the people of Israel from Egypt to the Promised Land, and doesn't join them in the Promised Land. He never enters Canaan, and in that journey he fulfills this part of God's will, and kind of is the person in the physical world who interprets what it is the gods want, or what is God wants. So that's a slightly different kind of figure to the Native American shaman or a holy man, who simply is the interlocutor with the world of the spirit. And the two figures have certain similarities, but there are key differences there as well. So you need to look at rituals. What are the rituals of your religion? What do the faithful do? Do they do things to their own bodies? Do they have rituals which help explain their place in the world? Rituals of purification, rituals of based around the seasons. Do they have ancestor worship? Do they clean the graves? Do they have rituals at certain times of the year of letting spirits come and go, or do they have a way of rituals that about recording time? Those sorts of basic precepts then shape everything else. That shape when sort of things like religious festivals come up, and what they're there for, and what historical significance those religious festivals have. Another key part of a religion, particularly religions that aren't based around, say, hunter-gatherer societies, is religious texts. Religious texts are really, really interesting things to look at. And part of the question you will perhaps have to ask yourself, especially if you're world building, is what the levels of literacy are. At the moment, when levels of literacy in Europe shot up during the 15th and the 16th centuries, you gained in the 16th and 17th centuries decades upon decades of religious warfare, things like the 30 Years' War, and the struggles of the Reformation. Why? Because of mass literacy, because of mass printing and mass literacy. All of a sudden, large numbers of people were able to read the Bible, and the Bible had been printed in vernacular languages, German, French, English, so on and so forth. And so they knew what it said, and they could interpret it for themselves, and all hell broke loose. And the Imperium, Christendom, which had been the kind of Imperium of the Catholic Church, obviously at the end of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, began to splinter and break apart. So religious texts, who has access to them, how many they are, the language they're printed in, and what they say, can shape an entire world. It's just worth pointing out, of course, that at the time in the 15th, 16th and 17th centuries, people wouldn't really have particularly read much else other than the Bible. That might not be the case in your world. It might be that your world has reached a point of sophistication whereby the religious text of the day really has to compete with lots and lots of other different kinds of literature of varying different natures in order to be read, and that again shapes people's attention, their focus, and what they're thinking about and doing. Of course, you have to question, a lot of what I've talked about here is based on human society, and non-humans who have different lifespans, who have different ways of seeing the world, will envisage the divine in completely different ways. You might have creatures that are so powerful and sophisticated and magical themselves that they haven't got much use for a conception of the divine, whether a God exists in their vicinity or not. They might think, well, what is the point of worshipping something when we are already powerful and godlike ourselves, or able to do all the things that we would need a god to do for us? It's worth considering that approach. Anyway, I'll be doing lots more on the development of religions and cults as well, and particularly the idea of not just the holy figure, but the darker, more charismatic cult leader figure. But that's coming up in the next few weeks. Anyway, if you enjoy this, please remember to subscribe and like and share and do all that stuff. Also, come and find us at www.verserpg.online, and we'll see you there. And check us out on Twitter and all the stuff, and I'll put the links all down below. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks very much. All the best. Bye.